Two B-52s took off from Fairford and flew south to hunt the Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer USS Roosevelt, which was one of 4 of the class of warships that operate from South China Sea in missile defense patrols. The capabilities of the United States Air Force's B-52 Stratofortress have expanded greatly since the aircraft first took flight in the 1950s. The Cold War-era heavy bombers have received regular updates, which could keep the venerable B-52 flying high for decades to come. In recent months, the B-52s have been deployed around the world from Guam to Europe, and earlier this week 2 subsonic B-52s call signs Bush 11 and Bush 12 flew from the Royal Air Force Base at Fairford and conducted joint exercises with Moroccan Air Force F-16s in a drill to find and sink a U.S. Navy destroyer. The exercise was conducted to demonstrate the bomber's latent anti-ship capabilities. This isn't exactly a new role or function for the B-52, however. Since the 1970s, the Stratofortress has been utilized in ocean surveillance missions in the Atlantic and Pacific, and its aircrews have routinely trained with the U.S. Navy in these missions. Moreover, in the 1980s the B-52 bombers stationed in Maine and Guam were armed with AGM-84 Harpoon anti-ship missiles to counter Soviet naval forces. The bombers could descend to low altitude, approach from different directions and launch salvos of harpoons to saturate defenses from upwards of 100 miles away. The use of the B-52 in such situations was notable in that the bombers could carry a large complement of missiles, but could also be replenished in a few hours versus the days or weeks that most warships required. Most importantly, the bomber had the range to strike at the enemy's warships well before those vessels came within range of targeting U.S. Navy ships. Given that Russia and China are upping the game with more advanced anti-ship weapons, it is easy to see why the U.S. military would want to utilize the B-52 in anti-surface warfare capacity. In exercise, 2 B-52s took off from Fairford and flew south to hunt the Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer USS Roosevelt, which was one of 4 of the class of warships that operate from South China Sea in missile defense patrols. It isn't entirely clear how the warship was targeted or how and even if it fought back, but according to reports it was score 1 for the B-52s. That mock sinking of a destroyer highlighted the B-52's capabilities in anti-surface warfare today. Conducting these missions alongside our African partners shows the strategic reach of our joint force and our collective commitment to preventing malign influence in Africa. B-52, an anti-ship role. It was obvious why the Pentagon wanted to give the B-52 an anti-ship role nearly 40 years ago. Range, speed, loiter time and over-the-horizon communications and array of sensors onboard are the bomber's main attributes for maritime operations, the Air Force stated. B-52s can hold at risk a huge area. In 2 hours, 2 B-52s can monitor 140,000 square miles of ocean surface. While a lot of different U.S. military aircraft types can carry harpoons, few can carry 12 harpoons while also flying 8,000 miles from base, jamming enemy radars and receiving and sending data via several types of radio. A bomber would fly at high altitude while searching for a ship target, then drop to wave top height before launching its harpoons. The low altitude helps the crew to avoid the target vessel's own defenses. As a backup to the Harpoon, the B-52 also can drop laser-guided bombs to sink ships. Crews periodically train to do just that. In any event, it's likely the B-52s that flew over the Med were unarmed. Today 76 1960s vintage B-52Hs remain in service. The Air Force is spending billions of dollars upgrading the bombers not only with new radars, but also with better weapons, communications and engines, allowing them to fly and fight for decades longer. The modifications include compatibility with the 300-mile long-range anti-ship missile. Combined with the new radar, the LRASM will make a fearsome, ship-sinking bomber an even more fearsome ship-sinking bomber. Lightning Camera Pod. In 1983, the Air Force modified the B-52 to fire 100-mile range Harpoon anti-ship missiles, a preview of the following decade, when the Flying Branch also added a host of precision non-nuclear munitions to the venerable bomber. Still later, the Air Force started hanging the Lightning Camera Pod on the B-52, complementing the bomber's existing radar and infrared and electro-optical sensors. Back in 1989, Air Force researcher Maj. Gregory Berlin recommended the Flying Branch equip the B-52 with a new radar that would assist with the Maritime Strike Mission. The bomber's original, and frankly antiquated, APQ-166 apparently isn't up to the task. Improved capability is achieved by enabling the B-52 to positively identify enemy vessels without resorting to flying within sight of the enemy vessels. Against surface vessels, this ability could be achieved by modifying the B-52 with synthetic aperture and inverted synthetic aperture radar sets. That never happened, although the Air Force has tested out the B-52 with the ASQ-236, a synthetic aperture radar in a pod. Today F-15E and F-16 fighters routinely carry the SAR pod, B-52s do not. An upgrade program replacing the APQ-166 radar with a new electronically scanned array radar should improve the B-52's maritime surveillance capability starting in the mid-2020s. In the meantime, the B-52 uses the Lightning Camera Pod and cues from satellites and other aircraft to visually scan the ocean. Not coincidentally, the bombers flying from Fairford since late August have been photographed carrying lightnings between their engines on their starboard wings on most, if not all, of their missions. The camera pod is becoming standard equipment. The B-52s from Fairford took off, flew south and hunted the Arleigh Burke-class missile destroyer USS Roosevelt, which is one of 4 Burkes that sail from Spain for missile defense patrols. How effective the B-52s were and what Roosevelt did to dodge or fight back remain unclear. But it's safe to say no ship's crew enjoys staring down potentially 24C skimming cruise missiles.